Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a truly fascinating subject. We're taking a close look at how a grassroots movement in Jackson, Mississippi is attempting to just completely reshape its local economy from the ground up. It's a story packed with history, some highly ambitious economic theory, and the very real day-to-day struggle for ecological survival. And even if you've never set foot in Mississippi, the big questions they're asking down there about how communities actually survive, well, they might just change how you view your own neighborhood. So what's really striking here is the sheer contrast. Mississippi has historically faced some immense economic struggles, along with deep-seated systemic inequalities. And yet, right there in its capital city, organizers are building this highly ambitious anti-capitalist experiment. They aren't just trying to put a Band-Aid on the current system, they are actively working to build a completely new one to replace it.
Here's how we're going to break this all down today. First, a radical experiment in Mississippi. Then, the Jackson-Cush Plan. Next, building a solidarity economy, followed by achievements on the ground. Then, we'll look at eco-socialism and ecological survival, and finally wrap up with challenges and the future.
All right, Part 1, a radical experiment in Mississippi.
To really understand this movement, we've got to look back, because this didn't just pop up overnight. It's deeply rooted in a decades-long push for Black self-determination in the American South. The foundation actually goes back to a really tense standoff in 1971. A young civil rights attorney named Chokwe Lumumba was leading a caravan for the Republic of New Africa, which was a group seeking an independent Black nation, and they were met by a heavily armed police roadblock. According to the historical accounts, Lumumba and his group stood their ground, and eventually the roadblock parted. That specific moment birthed the enduring rallying cry, "Free the Land," and that phrase became an absolute cornerstone for the activists who later settled in Jackson.
Fast forward through decades of grassroots organizing by Lumumba and others, and it eventually paved the way for a massive political shift. In 2013, Chokwe Lumumba was actually elected mayor of Jackson, running on a highly radical platform. Now, he tragically passed away shortly after taking office, but his victory really set the stage. The very next year, in 2014, organizers led by Kalia Kuno founded Cooperation Jackson to carry that economic vision forward.
Which brings us to Part 2, the Jackson-Cush Plan.
So what is the actual blueprint driving these changes? Well, the crucial thing to understand is that the Jackson-Cush Plan utilizes what's known as a dual power strategy. It doesn't just want to reform the existing government from the inside out. Instead, it aims to build a completely alternative base of power outside of the government, using community institutions while simultaneously running candidates to win traditional state power. It's really a two-pronged inside-outside approach.
This dual power strategy basically relies on three main pillars that are designed to reinforce one another. First up, people's assemblies. These are direct democracy gatherings where residents can actually voice their needs and hold leaders accountable face-to-face. Second, running independent political candidates to champion those specific needs. And third, employing a solidarity economy to socialize the means of production for the Black working class majority. They work in tandem to build power literally from the ground up.
Let's focus on that last pillar in Part 3, building a solidarity economy.
Okay, solidarity economy. Let's de-jargonize that for a second. What does that actually mean in practice? Essentially, it's creating an economic network where businesses aren't owned by distant shareholders, but are democratically run by the workers themselves. The primary goal here isn't maximizing capitalist profit, it's about meeting collective community needs, ensuring equity, and regenerating the local environment. Think of it like this. Instead of profits leaving the city to line the pockets of Wall Street investors, that wealth is intentionally trapped and circulated right there inside the Jackson community. To put that into perspective, just think about the number 45. That is the number of properties currently being stewarded by the Fannie Lou Hamer Community Land Trust, which was established by Cooperation Jackson. By stepping in and purchasing vacant lots and abandoned homes, they actively remove this land from the speculative real estate market. And the so what here is huge. It prevents gentrification and ensures permanently affordable housing for the community.
Moving on to Part 4, achievements on the ground.
So how does all this theory play out in the real world? Well, over the last decade, Cooperation Jackson has birthed a vast interconnected array of worker cooperatives. We're talking everything from urban farming and landscaping to a fully functioning 3D printing fabrication lab and even a community catering business. By owning these varied businesses, they are actively building alternative institutions to meet daily needs, from food to tech, without having to rely on massive outside corporations. These are tangible, physical structures proving that a localized, solidarity-driven economy can actually produce what a community needs to survive. And what's brilliant is how these co-ops aren't just operating in silos. They literally feed into one another to create a localized, self-sustaining supply chain. For example, the Green Team gathers organic yard waste, which the Zero Waste Cooperative then processes into commercial-grade compost. Then, that compost gets used by Freedom Farms to grow organic food right there for the community. It's a completely closed-loop system working on the ground in Jackson. Now, politically, this got a huge boost when the elder mayor, Lumumba's son, Chokwe Antar Lumumba, ran for office and won in 2017. He fully embraced this sweeping, ambitious vision, even boldly declaring his intention to make Jackson the most radical city on the planet. But, as the source material points out, trying to execute this kind of outside-the-box vision from inside the walls of City Hall, that would prove to be incredibly complex and full of political friction.
This brings us to Part 5. Eco-socialism and ecological survival.
See, the ultimate goal of this entire network goes way beyond just economics. It's deeply tied to environmental survival through a concept they call eco-socialism. In everyday terms, eco-socialism argues that you simply cannot fix the environment without fixing the economy. The organizers argue that industrial capitalism inherently treats both human labor and the earth as totally disposable. Their counter-strategy to this is metabolic restoration. Basically, fixing the natural systems that industry damaged and turning waste back into vital resources, exactly like we saw with that compost and farming loop.
The core argument here is that simply hitting copy-paste on the traditional capitalist growth model is just going to replicate the same old inequalities and environmental destruction. Instead, they're advocating for a model that's hyper-focused on collective stewardship and ecological regeneration. For them, a democratic, localized economy isn't just a nice idea for fair wages, it is absolutely essential for actual planetary survival.
And they are thinking big here, way beyond city limits. They are already planning for the harsh realities of severe climate displacement. They've actually partnered with a land trust all the way up in Vermont to share land and resources, effectively creating a safe haven to protect the most vulnerable populations who might be forced to flee extreme weather in the South. They aren't just planting a few community gardens, they are literally drawing up the blueprints for climate refugee survival.
Finally, let's look at Part 6, Challenges and the Future. Now, as you might guess, trying to build a cooperative, eco-socialist utopia in the modern American South comes with some massive, sometimes overwhelming roadblocks. The movement has had to navigate incredibly difficult terrain. The sudden loss of their foundational leader, the elder Mayor Lumumba, really stunted their early momentum. Since then, they've had to deal with political infighting with subsequent city administrations, some highly restrictive policies from the state legislature, and, most pressingly, the catastrophic collapse of Jackson's basic municipal water infrastructure.
But despite these, frankly, massive hurdles, the work continues. As organizers like Kali Akuno note, this is very much an ongoing, experimental work in progress, and it is driven by the urgent, absolute necessity of survival. The compounding crises of climate change and failing infrastructure mean that these communities feel they have zero choice but to mobilize and build these resilient networks themselves immediately before it's too late.
So I want to leave you with this question to chew on. Is the radical solidarity economy being built right now in Jackson, Mississippi, the blueprint for the future of community survival? Or is it an isolated experiment facing just insurmountable odds? It's a question that really challenges our fundamental understanding of economics, community power, and the future of our environment. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.